Who is Jesus? Who is Jesus to you? A lot of people know his name. It's a very common curse word. We say it a lot when we shouldn't. A lot of people go to church and hear his name. You hear things like Jesus is love, and Jesus loves you, and you should come to know Jesus and follow Jesus, and you hear his name a lot. And what I've noticed in talking to most people, both Christian and non, is a lot of people know Jesus' birth, because Christmas, and they know Jesus died, Easter. Not many people know the middle. And that's when I realized in my walk, in my discipleship with people, I have erred because I was falling into the same trap that the churches today tell you. Invite somebody to church. Just bring them to church. Pray for one more. Bring them. Invite them. That, once they come to know Jesus, and then when you show up, they talk about whatever, and they really don't talk about knowing Jesus. They'll talk about something he said or something somebody said about him, and then they go off. And the people you brought to church are like, okay, that was nice. Thanks for the invitation. But nobody talks about exactly why he came and what he did while he was here. So everybody knows that he came, everybody knows that he died, and then some people debate even that. But what was his purpose? What was the reason for Jesus? What did he hope to accomplish with everything that he did? We talked in the last video about God and who he is and what he is for, and how over the course of human history, as a father of the world, his children got further and further away from him to the point that there was almost no relationship whatsoever. And the people that he had set as mediators were messing it up for everybody. And it got so bad, the Bible says at just the right time in history, he came down to earth. Now, this is where I think a lot of people get confused. You'll hear them say that Jesus is God and that Jesus is the Son of God. Both are true. So I'm going to try to explain that as easily as I can. You ever watch the show Undercover Boss? Some of you may have not. It was maybe 20 years ago at this point where the show was on TV. The show Undercover Boss was they would take people like, I don't know if this guy was actually on it, but like the CEO, owner of Walmart, right? They would take the CEO of this company that nobody knew because he was so far up the food chain that you wouldn't be recognized on the street. They would bring them to the job and put like prosthetics on them and fake glasses or whatever, wigs, and then put them in as a new entry-level employee. And they got to like see the company from the inside out. And it was a way for them to kind of see what was going on, what the people really thought about ownership and the culture. And then at the end of the episode, they would take off their wig and go, surprise, I actually own this company. And they were, oh, whoa. And it was a really cool show. I say all that because that is who Jesus is. Jesus was the original undercover boss, except he didn't need to show up to see what people were thinking. He already knew it. He showed up in the way, I own a small business, right? And when it started out, my company was very small. It was just me and one other employee out of the basement of my house. Over the years, we grew it and we grew it and we grew it to the point now that we have 40 employees, full-time employees that work, and I'm able to do stuff like this and not have to go to work all the time, and the work still gets done. I actually didn't understand God or Jesus until I became both a father myself and a business owner. If you look at a lot of the parables Jesus talked about, they are from those points of views: master and servant, employer, employee, father and son. And that's for good reason, because that's the easiest way to relate to him. We talked last week about God the Father. Today we're going to talk about Jesus, the undercover boss. So in my company, when I was on the job got done right because I was there, right? And then I started hiring employees, and I would have to train them. This is how we do it. This is where we put this. This is how this gets done. This is the time I want it done in. And then I would leave, go do my own work, and hope that they did it the way that I showed them to. And then I have to go back and check and make sure it was done right. I'm like, okay, you didn't do this. You forgot that. Tweak it, fix it. So kind of the same thing as God pulling away from, or I'm sorry, God, people pulling away from him. The same thing happens with a business that grows. Is all of a sudden I'm not in every van. All of a sudden I'm not at the shop every single day. I'm not around to see everything. And I have to hope that everything that I have put into place is actually going to get done. Doesn't always. So then you get rules. Then you get things, 10 commandments, Mosaic law. You'll get things that have to be put in place to make sure that stuff is done when the boss isn't around. The problem though, right, is like I said, my company's now at 40 employees. We had this one employee that I heard a lot of negativity about. He doesn't work. He doesn't pull his weight. He's not doing what he's supposed to. And I said, that's really weird that you say that, because I was just on a job with him last week. We worked side by side. I had to show up. It was a really big job. It was hard to do. And I went out to the job, which I usually don't. And I was out there with this employee. And I was like, I was just out there with him last week, and he was kicking butt. He was amazing. And he was up there doing things, and he was housing it and doing all this. And I was like, I was really impressed with him. And they all went, yeah, because you were there, because the boss was there. So of course he kicked it into high gear when you were there. But when you're not looking, he's a completely different person, and he's not doing all of those things he does when you're around. And I'm like, well, how am I supposed to know that? Because whenever I'm around, he's good. But the second I leave, he's not. And it got frustrating to me. I was new at being a business owner. I didn't know how to handle that. And that is exactly what's going on in this world right now. God is not as present as he used to be in the Garden of Eden and with Abraham and Noah, and he's not as heavily involved now as he used to be, for good reason. We'll get to that. The same way that a boss having to move further and further away is not going to be there with day-to-day operations. So if I was to go to a job, everybody's going to snap to, because the boss is there. Oh, we better wear the uniform and put this on and do that and act right and do what he said, because he's here. He can see. Very much like a child would if all of a sudden the parent shows up. They're like, oh, Dad, Mom's here. Oh, yeah. So he had to come as an undercover boss. He couldn't just show up as God and say, you're not doing what I said, here, do it. Because of course they would. And if you read through the Old Testament, that happened over and over and over again, where as a people, the Israelites would be given the promised land, and they'd be given the temple and Jerusalem and all of these things, and they would have it. And then over the course of several generations, 3-4 generations later, they had lost the way. So they had it, and then they would lose it, and they'd have to be punished. They'd have to be put into exile, or the city would be ruined, or they would be captive, or whatever it is. And they would go through centuries of some kind of a punishment. And then he would send a savior. He would send a judge or a hero, or somebody would show up on the scene and then fix it and say, turn back to God. And then all go, oh, thank God, he saved us. And then repeat. 3-4 generations later, they had lost the way. The great-grandchildren didn't know God, didn't know that person, the hero, the judge, whoever it was that saved them. And it just kept repeating forever. And God's like, this isn't working. That's not the idea, is for me to have to show up every couple hundred years and just remind and punish and remind and punish and remind. Wasn't working. Same way that as a business owner, I have to do the same thing. I'm going to give you a write-up. Okay, he's going to be good for a week, and then a week later, he's back to his old ways again, and then you repeat. So God had enough of that, both as a parent and as a boss, of just over and over and over again having this happen. So he goes, you know what? I can't show up on scene because everybody will just snap to again and go, oh, we love you, this is great. And then 300-400 years later, we're back to the same thing again. He goes, we have to set it straight. We have to start over, is what he did. So he came in human form. And that's where it messes a lot of people up, because they're like, is he God? Is he man? He's both. But in the way that God couldn't just show up like Adam, fully grown man overnight, because they'd be like, it's going like, okay, they would know that it's the boss, right? It can't be undercover boss if he's just showing off all of his power right out the gate. So he came in the form of an infant. He goes, I'm going to start at square one. And he did that for a number of reasons. He came as an infant, as a baby, born to Mary, a virgin, to literally start over, because maybe, I can't speak for God, maybe he wanted to do a dry run, right? He had created his children, and he had seen what they had dealt with, all the way from murder of Abel to disobeying and all the things they were doing that made him regret even doing it. So he's like, let's see, because I've done the same thing. An employee comes to me, they're like, oh, this doesn't work, or this is really hard. I'm like, give me that. Let me try it. Let me see. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes, let me see that. Okay, you did it wrong. Okay, here, do it again. Or they'll give it to me and I'm like, oh, wow, you're right. This is a terrible part or tool or process, or let's redo it. Sometimes doing it on your own, you get a different feel for it. I think that's what he was doing. Is he's like, let's start at square one. It'll be incognito, kind of, whole stars and wise men and everything. It was announced, but it was still kind of a secret. Like Herod couldn't find him. So he came and he started at square one. He goes, let's live this life and let's see if it's really as hard as everybody says it. I know he knows it's not, but he's like, we're going to do it all. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it 100% from the beginning. And he does. He comes and he lives a perfect life. He's coming the same way that a business owner like myself or somebody else would be like, let me show you how to do it. Let me show you, you say it's hard. You say you can't. Let me show you how. And he did it. So he came and he lived the perfect life And then when he got to the certain point, he had done all the things. He passed all the temptations. He didn't sin. He stayed above reproach. He lived the perfect life. And then he goes, all right, the time is now. He's about 33 years old. And he starts his ministry. His ministry was not of himself, right? Jesus didn't come to earth and say, listen to me, like, not listen to me. He didn't come and say, this is what I say. If you read over the Bible over and over and over and over again, and this is part of the problem with going to church, is a lot of time the church will skew it, and the church will make it sound a certain way, or they'll say something, or they'll just repeat what other churches are saying. I got a whole different view of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit from actually reading the text, and I'm like, that's not what it says. And that's not what I was told that means, and I would read it, and I would see it differently, and I'm like, so here's one of those things. Jesus always pointed back to the Father. Always. Even right to the very end, he said, what's given to me is given to me by my Father. He never boasted of his own strength, right? It wasn't, Jesus is here, I'm the man. It wasn't that. He even talked about the fact, humble and exalted and all that. First, he lived the example. He lived out what it meant to be a perfect human, a perfect life. But then he turned around after having lived it and said, okay, let me help all of you do it too. When he did all of these miracles, when he did all of these teachings, everything he did and said, if you read it the right way, was to go, this is how we're supposed to be in relationship with the Father. This is how you're supposed to be relating to God. This is how we're supposed to be living in relation to him. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks for the people at that time were the ones that had been in charge of the law. They were called the Pharisees. They were like priests of nowadays. They knew the law. They interpreted the law. They taught the sermons. They told everybody else how to live. They were the ones that took what Moses was given and said, okay, here's how do you apply it to your life. Now, the problem is, if you read Matthew 23, they butchered it, and they massacred it, and they bastardized it and made it a complete sham of what it was supposed to be. And people of those days didn't really know how to follow that God anymore. They were like, okay, I guess we're going to do what they say. Jesus at one point says, listen to what they say, but don't do what they do. They were so crooked that they were saying, hey, you have to do this. Then they do a completely different thing because they thought they were immune. So on top of the people being so far removed from God, they also had people that were leading them astray. And Jesus came, one of the biggest things that he did as part of his ministry was to tell them the right way. I know you've been told this, but here's what it means. And I know you've heard that, but here's what you should do. And this is what you've said, but this is what it really, and that was it was retraining is what he was doing, which upset the Pharisees because they had a really good thing going. If you read Matthew 23 and a bunch of other places in his ministry in the Gospels, over and over again, he's calling them outright names like Satans and hypocrites. And he was very, very angry and used very pointed language with them. He didn't mince words with them at all. In public, too, he would call them out and say, you guys are wrong. That's why they killed him. That's why Jesus was crucified, was because he came and upset their natural order, what they had been, their new world order. They're like, we're going to do all this, and we got a really good thing going for us. Jesus is like, no, don't listen to them. Listen to the Father. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Here's what the law actually says. And they didn't like it because he was upsetting their apple cart. The other thing he did is he talked in a lot of parables because he's trying to, like I said, I understood more of Jesus by being a business owner and a father, because now you deal with like toddlers and new employees. We were building quizzes for my employees. I hadn't been in about 10 years at this point in my company. We were building quizzes for new employees that were up to 30 days. They would take a quiz. And one of my managers asked me to write questions for it. So I wrote a bunch of questions down for it and gave it back. And he goes, John, they're not going to know any of this after 30 days. And I'm like, what? That's like entry-level stuff. That's like easy. It was easy for me with my advanced knowledge of the trade, but I was asking way too much of somebody after 30 days. And I sat there and I was like, what did I know after 30 days? Like the stuff that I'd written down as I thought were entry-level, I didn't know for like years after being in the trade. But I forgot what entry-level meant. And I had to sit there and go, wow, what would somebody after only 30 days in this industry know? And I realized how vast that chasm is and how quickly it is to get lost in that. And I had to humble myself It was a me problem. I couldn't talk to somebody only in 30 days because I was expecting way too much of them. You have to go way, way back in time to get stuff that they would know after just joining the company. So when Jesus is talking to these are people that have been trained wrong. All the Israelites and the Hebrews and all of the people listening to the Mosaic Law, they'd seen it portrayed wrong from these Pharisees. So he had to retrain them and explain it in such a way that you would take all of the knowledge of the universe and bring it down into like first grade language for people. And the way he did that was something called parables. He would tell a story. He'd be like, well, they'd ask him a question. He'd answer with, well, it's kind of like if a man had a son, or it's kind of like if a gardener had a tree, or it's like he would make it very, very easy to understand for them, which is funny because Jesus over and over again said things like, how can you not understand? Like, as a business owner, as a father, when I read some of Jesus's words, he was a lot more frustrated. People don't use that word with Jesus a lot. If you know Jesus from TV and from movies and in some churches, he's all very happy and he loves everybody. He's so nice and he is love. He is, but he wasn't always. Like everybody brings up, making the whip and whipping people out of the church and how Jesus was angry. He was righteous anger. But they miss things like the pointed language that he uses, which we'll talk about here. Jesus came to live a perfect life and to show everybody how to live a perfect life and show them the right way to listen to the law. He was doing a lot of retraining, a lot of re-educating here with these people, and they still weren't getting it. The other thing he did, first he would talk about the Pharisees, he would teach in a lot of parables, but then he would also be practicing what it would look like if somebody actually believed in God. And here's the interesting part, is Jesus's power by his own words were not his. They're not given by him. They were given by the Father. Everything that I have done is through the Father, by the Father. He was showing God's power, not his own. And that is where people get confused about Jesus, as if Jesus... Let me be very clear here. Jesus is God, but Jesus was not acting as if he was God, right? Let me give you a case in point here. So, Mark 5, demons driven out by Jesus, okay? This is where Legion, I don't know if you've heard about Legion before, but there was a man who was tormented. He had many demons living inside him. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him and cried out with a loud voice, "Why do you come? What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg before God, don't torment me." So the demons are scared of Jesus, and they beg him not to. Not to send them out of the region. There was a large herd of pigs. Jesus sends them into the pigs, and the pigs instantly kill themselves. But here's the point, and this is in Mark. This is Mark 5. This is the first real miracle, aside from like everybody talks about. His first miracle was the water into wine. This is the first miracle in Mark. So this is the first time that Mark is writing down. Maybe it's the first time he's seen a miracle from Jesus. He cast legion out of the man. And then Mark 5, verse 18. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged him earnestly that he might remain with Jesus. So he's like, I want to stay with you. I want to be part of your crowd. Can I stay with you? Verse 19, Jesus did not let him, but told him, "Go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." It's two things going on here. He cast the demons out, so he exemplifies his power over the demons and the fact that the demons recognized him, and they knew before he even said anything, "Please don't torment us." They were afraid right away. So instantly he demonstrates his power over demons as God in human form. But then he also, it's interesting here, had mercy on the man. The man, we forget about, was tormented by these demons. He was just the vessel being used. So he extinguishes that flame in the man. He helps him, saves him, heals him. But here's the interesting part. Jesus said, "Go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and had mercy on you. Not what I have done for you." Because once again, Jesus continually pointed back to the Father. He's like, my power is not mine. I'm here to show you the power of God. He says, go home and show them what the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. Verse 20, so the man went out and began to proclaim in the I'm just going to mess that word up. Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and they were all amazed. Let me do it again, so I screwed that word up. Go home and tell your own people, report to them how much the Lord has done for you, how he's had mercy on you. And the man went out and began to proclaim how much Jesus had done for him. See, he missed it right out the gate. Jesus healed him and said, go tell people about the power of God. And the man went out and said, hey, look at the power of Jesus. That man has become a lot of people in the church. You hear people pray to Jesus. You hear people talk about Jesus like he is God. Let me be very clear on that again. Jesus is God in human form. But it would be like this. Let's say in my company, I played undercover boss, right? I put on a wig and I put on different glasses and I shave my beard off and I go and I get hired into my company as a brand new employee and I start working and I'm doing, all the normal things and I'm living the life of a new employee. And as I'm going, all of a sudden somebody understands that I am the boss, but I'm still, let's say I changed my name and I wasn't John, I was Bob. I was Bob, the new employee, right? And people started to understand that Bob actually owned the company. Bob is John, but I'd show up with a shirt that said Bob on it and I would go to work and I would do what I was supposed to do. And people started to catch on that, this is actually John. He owns the company. But what if all of a sudden people in the company started saying, hey, I'm going to go to Bob if you don't stop. I'm going to go to that new employee, Bob, to get you fired. Or I'm going to have Bob write you up. Wouldn't make any sense, would it? Because Bob doesn't own the company. Bob isn't a real employee. I am the owner of the company. That's what's happening here. And that's where people get screwed up with the person of Jesus. Jesus was a human vessel for God to exemplify his own power. God was using a human vessel to show how to live a perfect life, how to glorify God, how to follow the law, how to do a lot of things. He was using a human form. And then people have messed that up into praising and worshiping the man of Jesus, not the God within him. And that's very important. Jesus is a human body. When Jesus heals this man, he goes, go and tell how much the Lord has done for you. And the man goes, look what Jesus did. And that's wrong. So what's interesting is the very next section here in chapter 5. A girl restored and a woman is healed. You come down to the end. Jesus is still healing people. He gets down and there's a child who is dead, and the man comes to Jesus to heal his daughter. He heals the daughter. Still in chapter 5, verse 42, it says, immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years old. At this, they were utterly astounded. Verse 43, then Jesus gave them strict orders that no one should know about this and told them to give her something to eat. It's funny how quickly he changes. He goes over here and he says, go home to your people and report to all of them what the Lord has done for you. What he's trying to do is, yes, I in human form healed you, but it's not. It's really God. And you need to go tell everybody. Go and tell everyone what the Lord has done for you. And the man runs out and ruins it. Hey, look what Jesus did. And he's like, no, it's not what I said. And the very next time we see him tell somebody, he says they should tell no one. Like there's a middle ground for me, right? I would go from, okay, let's start over. Not me, but the Lord. He just goes to straight no. And that happens a lot throughout the Gospels as you're reading it, where Jesus goes, don't tell anybody this happened. Don't tell anybody I healed you. And at one of the time, the man goes straight to the Pharisees, and he goes and he was telling so many people, the Pharisees come and get him. It gets out of hand, which leads to his death. But he learned early on that the people, they were going to ruin it. And they did. This guy here, the guy that Legion was cast out of, started right at the gate a failure. He's like, that's not what I told you to say, because it's God's power at work, not the man of Jesus. So we go on. Jesus gives his power to his disciples to go out and cast out demons. Let me find it here. I know I just had it. So then right there in Mark 6, he summoned the 12 and began to send them out in pairs and gave them authority over unclean spirits. So they've watched him heal numerous people at this point. He then sends them out in pairs, gives them the authority over unclean spirits, and instructed them to take nothing for the road except a staff, no bread, no traveling bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not put on an extra shirt. He said to them, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that place. If any place does not welcome you. And then verse 12, so they went out and preached that people should repent. Verse 13, they drove out many demons, anointed many sick people with oil, and healed them. So they've watched Jesus heal people. He then gives them authority over unclean spirits, and he sends them out, and they drove out many demons, anointed many sick people with oil, and he healed them. So everything's going great, right? Until a couple pages. You come over here, and we're now in Mark 9, verse 14. Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, it foams him at the mouth, it grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't." So now we've met an immovable force, right? The disciples are out and they're healing people, and they've come across one they just can't beat. This one must be like a super demon, right? This must be that something's wrong here. You know, Jesus cast out Legion, but they can't cast this one out. This one must be like that, right? Jesus' response to that, I asked your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't. Jesus snaps. You unbelieving generation, how long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? He's frustrated. He's lived the perfect life. He's saying all the right things, doing all the right things, and people are still the denominator here. People are still the ones that are messing this up. Even the people walking with him are stumbling, to the point that he says, you unbelieving generation, how long do I have to put up with you? As a business owner, I felt that. As a parent, unfortunately, I hate to admit it, I felt that too. How long do I have to? Why? What is it going to take to get this through your heads? I'm sure you felt that too. He says, bring him to me. So they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, it immediately threw the boy into convulsions. He fell to the ground, rolled over, foaming at the mouth. So once again, the demon recognizes Jesus as the authority here, same as Legion did. But here's the interesting part. Follow me on this. When Jesus saw that a crowd was quickly gathering, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. Then it came out, shrieking, throwing him into a terrible convulsions. The boy became like a corpse, so that many said, he's dead. But Jesus, taking him by the hand, raised him, and he stood up. So Jesus once again uses his power to send demons out of this boy. But how he did it? Just by saying, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. Verse 28, and this is where it's interesting. After he had gone into the house, his disciples asked him privately, right? They wait till everybody's gone. They have no problem going out and healing and teaching and talking, doing all these things, but all of a sudden they can't. Now they're going to pull Jesus aside, and they're like, what was wrong with that one? And they actually said it, why couldn't we drive it out? Like they're asking, what was the special about this demon? What's interesting is there was nothing special about the demon. Jesus, and you have to read this with this frustrated business owner, frustrated dad, however you want to look at it. His answer is, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer. Jesus didn't pray over the demon. He actually rebuked it, you mute and deaf spirit, and then he just commanded, come out of him and never enter him again. It was a command. Jesus didn't pray. But his answer is, this kind can only come out by prayer, which means the disciples were going around thinking they were the ones removing it. They even said it here, why can't we drive it out? They had gotten so full of their own power, which is something Jesus never did. Jesus never turned around and went, look how great I am. Never, because he knew that the body of Jesus was a vessel, that God within him was the true power, and his Father in heaven was the true power. But he never bragged about himself. Instead, they went out in pairs casting out demons. And I'm sure, as humans do, they got full of themselves. They're like, we've cast out so many demons. Dude, how many did you get? You got like 20. I got 25. No big deal. Like, we're killing it. We're awesome. And they finally get to one. And I'm sure at that point, maybe in the beginning, like most new employees or somebody new at a new task, they went into it, beginner's luck kind of thing, or they were just very full of, the Spirit, and they're like doing what Jesus said. But then the more and more they did, they started to fall off, and it became, get out of him. Come on, I said so. And the demon's like, I don't know you. And they're like, come on, get out. He's like, I don't know you. Because when they were casting out demons, they were supposed to be casting them out in the name of God. They were supposed to be praying to God to remove the demon. They weren't removing anything. They, the same as Jesus, were using the power of God to do it. And the second it turned into, we're the ones doing it, the demons didn't listen. And Jesus answered them. That kind only comes out by praying. And I can see it. I can see it. I know how I would say it as a human to an employee or to a child when they came with that. It would be kind of snarky, that answer there. You can read that with any kind of inflection you want. I read it as somebody frustrated with who he's been trying to teach. Why can't we drive it out? Because that kind can only come out by prayer. And it just ends. Doesn't say what the disciples said or how the rest of that conversation went. I can kind of feel how it went because I think they got the picture. They're like, right. We're not the ones doing this at all, are we? You are. He is. Jesus is like, yeah, that's the idea. Now, fast forward over here, still in Mark 9. Now we're in verse 38. John said to him, teacher, right? So now the disciples are going to rat somebody out. They were sent out to go do works in Jesus' name. They got full of themselves, all of a sudden ran up against a roadblock, couldn't do it, had to be shamed, had to be understood. You're not the one doing it. They're like, okay, sorry, we got it. Verse 38, John said to him, teacher, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he wasn't following us. So they're like, we didn't do it right. And we got admonished and we got slapped on the wrist. And I don't know if they lost their privileges or whatever, whatever. Jesus says, verse 39, Jesus says, don't stop him. Because there is no one who will perform a miracle in my name who can soon afterwards speak evil of me. For whoever is not against us is for us. We just talked about the fact that demons can't be removed by human power. Humans do not have the capability or the authority to remove demons. Even when Jesus back there gave the authority to them, really what he gave them was prayer. Ask God and he'll take it out. Use God's power, not your own. They're out there doing it right until they did it wrong. If somebody's out there, and John even says it, they're driving out demons in your name. They were using the name of Jesus. Maybe they're using the name of God. I don't know, but they were doing it right. How do we know they were doing it right? They were doing it right because it was working. And they had just failed. So instead of being excited about the fact that it was working, finally people had understood that it was through Jesus' teaching and the word of God and the authority over, and they were casting him out. He was doing it right. And their reaction was, tell him to stop. Jesus goes, no. You've missed the whole point again. They're doing it right. You're just mad because you didn't. So over and over again, just when you're reading through the Gospels, if you're reading about God, he's the Father. He is the overreaching umbrella of creation and love. He created everything here, and he's looking down on it, wanting nothing more than a relationship. When the relationship was so fractured to the point it wasn't working anymore, he goes, I'll do it myself. And he came down and he made a human vessel for himself, and he took the form of a baby, and he grew up and lived a perfect life to show that it could be done. And then when he became a teacher, he went out and he started showing everybody the right way to do it. And even when people walked with him, talked with him, had the authority given by him, they still couldn't do it because we're the problem. We are the problem. Humans, our free will, our incapacity to believe. We are the problem. We'll get to another video where I'm going to talk about, what if God just showed up? There are so many instances of people who walked and talked with God that still didn't get it, that God is not the problem. Jesus is not the problem. It's us. We need to have the faith of a child. We are to look at the Father as exactly that, as our Father. Look to Jesus not as the one to be worshipped, not as the one to be lifted, not as the one to be praised, the same way that he didn't want anybody knowing that he was the one casting it out. His whole purpose was to point us to the Father. And instead we turn around and worship him. The same way the man who had legion cast out of him did the same thing. Jesus said, go and talk about my dad. And the man went, Jesus. He missed the point. The same way he sent out his own disciples saying, go send these demons out in the name of my dad. And they came back and went, oh, we can't do it. And then when somebody got the picture that wasn't part of their clique, he was out there doing it right, going, get out in the name of God, otherwise it wouldn't work. They wanted to stop him. So read the Gospels, but read them for yourself. Don't just read what I'm telling you. Don't just read what pastors are telling you or we've heard other people say. Sit and actually open it up and read it from the beginning, but read it with those two lenses on. That God is not this angry Zeus judge. He's a father that loves you and loves every single person mentioned in this book, whether they listen to him or not. He still loves them because he created them. And when you read Jesus and what he is saying and what he is teaching and what he exemplified, picture the Father pretending to be a human. Picture a boss pretending to be an employee, the undercover boss coming in, and instead of just learning how people are feeling, he comes in and he goes, hey, what if we did it this way? What if we tried this? Because I know it'll work. Trust me, I know it'll work because I own the company. Do it. He came in to enact change from within, not to spy. He came in to restart the algorithm from the inside out. And it worked. Boy, did it work. We'll get to that later about how we know for a fact that Jesus is what he is and did what he did and said what he said. I can prove it in the next video. But as you're reading it, that's who it is. Jesus the man. Jesus the man is a man. He had God inside him. He was made from God, by God. This is why it gets so hard to explain. People go, oh my God, you can't say that. Jesus was a man. Jesus was a vessel for the Most High living God. And everything he did by his own mouth was by the power of his Father, not his own. He did not come here to be a king. He did not come here to be praised. He did not come here to be God. He came here to be a man in relationship with God. That is his purpose. So when people praise Jesus and pray to Jesus and talk to Jesus, even when he taught how to pray, which is interesting because they come to him and they say, Jesus, how do you pray? Right? And this comes after they've been casting out demons. This comes after all of this stuff. They've already walked on water. They've already done all of this stuff. And then they come and go, how do we act? They're starting to get it. By asking that question, how do we pray? They finally understood it. They're like, how do we talk to him? Because they understood it wasn't about Jesus anymore. They understood that he was using the power of his Father. And when they come to him and they say, how do we pray? What they're asking is, okay, we get it. We go to him. How do we do it? It's a beautiful representation of them, their eyes finally opening. And how does he teach them to pray? Dear Dad, Heavenly Father, my Father that is in heaven. He started with that to show them you're not talking to a Christmas god, a Santa Claus. You're not talking to a mythical beast. You're not talking to a wish list or a genie. You're not talking to a Zeus or a police officer. You're not talking to any of those things. You're talking to my Father in heaven. On that note, the prayer that he gives them is a roadmap. It is an example. It is just a basis for prayer. Repeating blindly what he said once is not knowing him. It is not following him. I had an employee, we have to set up ladders at our job. I had an employee, we go out to a house one time, and I was trying to train him into becoming a lead technician, and I said, where would you put the ladder? I want to give him a little bit of a chance to grow on his own. I said, where would you put it? He walks around the house and he looks at it and he goes, I'd put it right here. And I was like, why? He goes, well, this and this and that. And he gave some reasons. And I was like, you were close. Actually, it should go here. And here's why. And I listed off a bunch of the reasons why it should go there. I was like, that was a good try though. Over here's better. Give it about a month, and he's out with another technician. The technician comes back, and he goes, "What did you do to this guy?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Dude, I can't work with him. I don't know what you did to him when you had him when you were training, but I can't work with him." I was like, "Why?" He goes, "We get to this job, and I go to put the ladder up, and he goes, no, that's not where John wants the ladder. No. John wants it here every time." And I literally laughed. I'm like, "I didn't say that. I didn't say that was a case by case. That was a one-off. I forget what it was. There was some reason, like there was an air conditioner or a propane tank over there, or the ground sloped too much, or the sun was on that side of the house and I wanted to be in the shade. I don't know what the reason was. It was a one-off. I said, "Here's where I want it today." And he took that as gospel, and he went out for the next month saying it has to go here, it has to go here, it has to go here. And finally somebody called him on it. And they're like, "What are you doing?" "Well, John said." No, he didn't. So with things like the prayer, simply repeating that does nothing. You treat it, if you were raised in that and you were taught that you have to repeat, "Our Father art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, there will be," you're droning. You're mindlessly repeating something, almost as if it's an incantation, like they're magical words that are going to do something. That prayer was to show an outline. The first thing you start with is how to honor and glorify God. Hallowed be your name. That's about him. Put him first. Then give us our daily bread. Don't ask for too much. Ask for what you need in the moment, right? He goes through, I'll do a whole video on this later. He goes through it and breaks it down into chunks. Like, this is how you should do it. Start with this, and then move to this, and then go over here, and then go with that, and then finish with this. And then you'll have people today that are like, "I cheated on my wife." Well, say that prayer. "Our Father art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will." That has nothing to do with why you're praying. I know people that pray that over food. "Give us this day our daily bread." Your daily bread's in front of you. What are you praying for? That's not what the prayer says. It's an outline. Same thing as a number of other things that Jesus said in here. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie The Life of Brian. It's a Monty Python. And if you've heard of Monty Python, you probably know the Holy Grail, Ministry of Silly Walk, stuff like that. Monty Python. They're silly. They're literally funny. That's what they do. Comedy troupe. They did a movie called The Life of Brian. And if you have heard of it, stay with me. If you have not heard of it, there's a reason. It was actually banned in a lot of countries and a lot of places because it's heretical and it's blasphemous. I heard that growing up my whole life. I knew about this movie. Never saw it. Stayed away from it because I was like, "I don't want to go to hell if I watch it," kind of thing. Then one day I was home from work and I had nothing better to do and I was home alone. And I was like, "You know what? Just something like told me, I was like, you need to watch this." I'm like, "I don't want to watch it." So I actually prayed a really heavy prayer beforehand. I didn't start with, "Hallowed be thy name, thy will be done, thy kingdom come, give me this day my daily bread." I didn't pray like that. I literally prayed for what I needed. I was like, "God, I'm about to do something that I'm scared about. I've heard that it's heretical. I've heard that it's blasphemous. Father, please help me through this. And if I shouldn't do it, don't let me," it was a heartfelt, I'm talking to my dad to help me kind of prayer. And then I watched it. What's interesting is I didn't find anything heretical in that movie. And if you did, stay with me. They never once discredit the man of Jesus or the power and supremacy of God or the teachings of Jesus. They do none of it. They actually, they make it a big deal when Jesus is on screen or when God is talked about, like music plays and light shines, and they hold up the deity of Jesus, the Son of God, and God. They never once discredit either of them. But they do make fun of Christians. And I think that's where people banned it, is because they never made fun of God. They never made fun of Jesus, but they did make fun of you and me. And that's people went, "That's too much," but actually they were right. There's a scene in the movie. The whole movie is about, it's one of those comedy of mistaken identity, right? There's a man named Brian who is born in the stable next to Jesus, right? So already this is just going to be like ridiculous. But he's born next door, and the wise men show up and try to pay homage to him, and they're like, whoa, you want the next stable over. So it starts like that. And the rest of the movie, he's mistaken for Jesus in a number of different ways. And every time he goes, no, you want that guy. You do not want to hear what I have to say. You want him. He's the one. He's over there. The whole movie, he keeps pushing people to Jesus. Go follow that man. Listen to what he has to say. And it comes to a head at one point where he finally gives in. He's like, "Fine, I'll just start saying stuff." And he starts saying things, trying to get people to listen to him, just to leave him alone. But the crowds grow, and he ends up, creating more of an issue. So he starts to run, and he runs away because he's like, this is not for me. He's running down a street, and he loses a shoe as he's running. And he goes back for it, but realizes the people are too close, so he runs away and he leaves it, and he runs off without, I think it's his right shoe. And the people converge on it. And one of the guys picks it up, and he goes, oh, he's left us a sign. We are to lift up our right shoes, take them off and lift them up because they are holy, because he left the right shoe for us. And everybody, well, not everybody, half the people start taking off their right shoe and holding it up and stroking it. No, and they're praying to it and they're rubbing it. And the other guy knocks it out of his hand and he goes, no, he has shown us that the right shoe is evil and we are to cast off our right shoes. Everybody take off your right shoes and throw them as far as you can. And people are like, ah, they're throwing it and they're like chucking it and they're like, wiping their feet off. And it's a whole big farce because they're showing exactly what's wrong with us. It's not about the shoe. It's not about the prayer. It's not about the words. It's about your heart. That whole movie, yeah, it ends with they're making fun of crucifixion, which is another thing. I actually did not like that part where the end of the movie is they're singing while crucified. In that scene, they're actually making fun of Spartacus because there's a scene at the end of Spartacus with a road full of... Anyway, is it in poor taste? Yeah, the movie is. But that's what comedy is a lot of poor taste, and you don't laugh at all the jokes either when somebody tells them. In that movie, though, the one thing I can tell you is on top of being crude and in poor taste, they never once discredit Jesus or God. What they do is they point out our flaws in following him. And that's one of them that's what separates so many churches. I went to a church once, and I forget what the Methodist Baptist something, it was down in Florida, and I went there and I was like, I was actually raised Baptist. I wasn't. I was just told I was, but whatever. I was like, I was raised Baptist, and this is, I think, Methodist. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't care about all the different facets of religion like this for good reason, like shoes. But I said, what's the difference between the two? And he goes, well, Baptists believe you have to be submersed underwater. Methodists believe you can sprinkle water. And I went, what? This is the pastor of the church. And I was like, what? That's it? And he goes, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how it started. It's trivial, stupid little things that we fight over separates entire groups of people, wars between families where they're like, you're a Baptist and I'm a Methodist, or you're a Protestant and I'm a Lutheran, and you're a that, and everybody's just at each other's throats over the same God and the same man that God used to fulfill all of this, and the same words that he's left us to listen to. We sit here and go, well, you have to repeat the prayer word for word. Oh, no, you don't. You actually have to just talk to your dad. Oh, well, no, you have to. No. And that's where we get all tied up in how and why instead of just do. Just believe. That's it. Take all of everything else. Jesus said, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, tiny, itty bitty, tiny little faith, if you even had this much, and he's talking to his disciples in that quote, when he says, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, like you see the face, I feel for him as a business owner, father, employees, and sons, like you can feel that he's not condemning them, but it's snarky again. He's like, if you just had a tiny little bit of faith, but you don't, neither do we. We get all caught up in, should we hold up our right shoe or should we cast it off? Should we sprinkle water or should we submerse? Should we, read this or should we read that? Or should we do this? Should we do that? And Jesus came for this exact reason. Stop listening to those people and read for yourself. Listen for yourself. Know God. Don't follow the man form that he took to come and show you God. Follow God. That's what Jesus is. When they say Christian, Christ-like, be like him. Be like Christ in the way that he came, lived a perfect life, followed all the rules, and loved his Father and put him first. And everything Jesus did, he did in his Father's name.